As reflected by a Beijing media outlet observing the opening of the 1980 Moscow Games, more and more people have come to a realization that international sports cannot be separated from international politics. As my last assessment on the 1936 Berlin Games revealed, the Olympic Games, the pinnacle of international competition, has always struggled to remain solely a stage for athletic prowess, and not a battleground for global politics. This brief exploration into the 1980 Moscow and the 1984 Los Angeles Games aims to uncover what these events reflected, as well as how they contributed to a heightening of Cold War tensions. The United States-led boycott of Moscow in 1980 was a measure against the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The United States and the Soviet Union had engaged in varying degrees of proxy wars for much of the Cold War. This latest surrogate war, now differentiated in this case by America's non-military capabilities supporting the conflict. This was merely another manifestation of the limited wars between East and West, communism and capitalism. Almost global condemnation of the Soviet invasion ensued, with having only to offer CIA-funneled funding to the Mujahideen forces. A boycott of the Games offered them an opportunity to protest the domestic or international policies, specifically the invasion of Afghanistan. Despite many nations not boycotting the Games entirely, the efforts of the Western leaders to boycott was significant. In early 1980, Soviet condemnation was broad, with one Chinese media outlet going so far to describe the upcoming Games as only a sports meet between Eastern European nations. The eventual boycott gained support from a number of important states, such as China and Japan. However, those like Australia still competed under the Olympic flag. Great Britain makes an interesting example of how it could be seen that the Moscow boycott indeed reflected a cooling of Cold War tension. Margaret Thatcher's determination, though inability to withdraw the United Kingdom from Moscow, suggests that at least a large portion of the UK's Parliament and represented people did not wish to turn away from the event. Despite leaders being invested into the continuation of Cold War politics, individuals from both the East and West, even globally, seemed to just want to move on with their lives. Despite the case of the UK, the US-led boycott undoubtedly indicated a return to heightened tensions, at the very least between the lead communist and capitalist powers. The Moscow Olympics had merely been following a tradition where sport and the arts were increasingly politicized in the East versus West battle of propaganda. On theme with the rest of the Cold War conflicts, the opposing ideologies sought the Olympic world stage, well aside from the battlefield. Through a protracted process, the US city of Los Angeles were awarded the 84 Games despite no alternative countries bidding. Whilst it has been considered a tit-for-tat reaction, this justification for Soviet boycott of Los Angeles is squashed by the fact that the Soviets had challenged the International Olympic Committee decision to hold the Games as early as 1978, a year before the invasion of Afghanistan and well before the American-led boycott. The Soviet Union claimed the boycott was to protest specific failures of the LA Olympic Organizing Committee, or the LAOOC, which led to ineffective and inappropriate organization of the 84 Games. These fears of athlete security do appear relatively unfounded, as the LAOOC appeared to work with them, breaking protocol to allow the Grazia, a Soviet ship, to house athletes for the duration of the Games. Another Soviet fear, the small but loud demonstrations of the Ban the Soviets coalition, does reflect some of the residual tensions in the war around 1983 to 84. This group was formed in response to the Soviet shooting of a South Korean passenger jet, killing 269 people. Here, the boycott of Los Angeles reflects the distrust members on both sides had in one another. Still locked in a surrogate war in Afghanistan, and under a year since the United States War Games were misinterpreted as a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union, a tense political atmosphere still existed between these two superpowers. As for considering how this boycott, and indeed the US-led boycott, acted to heighten the conflict comes back to the idea of a surrogate war. As noted, both states sought to show the superior nature of their political ideologies through competition in these world events, and what better way to diminish the success of the opposing side than restrict the countries competing. With 2020 hindsight to look back on these events, it appears both boycotts were of the last few public shows of tensions before Soviet reform in perestroika and glasnost in the following years. While difficult to realise today, they reflect the genuine tension for individuals and states who, amidst a long and protracted conflict, were unsure whether they needed to maintain alert of the enemy or continue on with their lives.